Hello and welcome back to our series we're calling the DM's Travel Book Club, a guide to the planes. In each episode, we explore the planes of existence as outlined in the great wheel cosmology in the role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons. With me, as always, is Hamilton. Hamilton, how are you, my friend?
I'm good. How are you, Fiona?
I am doing very good. Obviously, we've left behind the planes of chaos. I've
We have.
done with those. I don't have to worry about ever fighting to survival, and I am looking for a wonderful time on the planes of lore.
Yeah, they're not all good. They're not all right.
No, and it's
definitely
actually
more order to them, but it's definitely not all good.
No, this is an interesting point. I did want to bring up straight away is that in the little primer, sort of the player's guide to the planes of lore, it actually talks about how there's this sort of notion that the laws of plane are stuffy places that are like, oh, this is a rule here, something like that. When only really one of those planes, the Carnus, is like that. That is true law abiding. Everything is as written. Whereas the other ones, they're not as sort of strict. And I quite liked it did say that every aspect of people's lives is regulated by laws and commandments that is internal to themselves and internal to that plane. So that is very interesting. I actually didn't consider that when we were about to read it. So I was like, very interesting.
Yeah, those laws are as much sort of like physics laws, like laws of physics, as much as they are sort of hierarchical laws, as much as sort of moral or like morality laws or whatever you want to call them, or strict scriptures or whatever that you need to adhere to. So sometimes it's forced upon you by the plane itself, as in there's nothing you can do about it, but it is just as we will mention one particular of this plane that we're talking about, which is what, Fiona?
Which is what? Yes, we are talking about Acheron, sort of the plane of clash and conflict, which I think is a great sort of title. So this is a lawful evil and a lawful neutral plane, and it is argued in this sort of book, in sort of the first plane of law book of Acheron. It talks about that it's worse than the Abyss, which is shocking because the Abyss is awful, as you know.
Yes.
As you put your players in there, but yes,
I have.
So just to sort of brief sort of like what is Acheron? It is the plane of battle. This is the idea of marching armies and sort of this idea that there's drilling and just fighting, and that's all there is over and over again.
It is the military industrial complex as a plane. That is basically what it is,
Yes, absolutely. And compared to, say, Yggdrasil? No, not Yggdrasil. Compared to Ysgard, sorry.
Yes.
The idea is like heroic, like haha, and fighting there. This is completely
This is trudging, endless war. It is the grim, dark future, if anyone knows what I'm referencing there, that is very much that sort of like Warhammer 40k, sort of like the endless battle. For no gain. It's it's the no man's land, continually fighting for an inch here, a yard there, and it never really it's kind of, and it's because of that, it's the battleground for not only the Blood War, which is something that we will come on to again. We talked about briefly in the Abyss, and we'll talk about more when we get to Nine Hells and Battle. But this is the plane where the demons and the devils clash for dominance over the planes, basically.
Exactly. And it talks about, again, this idea of lawful, so it talks about this idea of underlying laws and order all serve conformity and evil, and evil thrives in war. And there's a great line in it that says that evil's almost like an afterthought here, because it is just that drilling, that constant, like, we must get ahead in battle and stuff like that. And it's interesting, he talks about these battles with armies and stuff, but less likely to have leaders. It's just mobs of people fighting each other, because they don't think about maybe the bigger picture per se, which I think is a very interesting concept. This idea that what was it that it said? I'm sure I'll find it in a second, but essentially this idea of three things of like plundering, that sort of survival instincts, but not necessarily like, well, if we go to a different plane and come back round, we can get the other bit. It's just about that what's here and now, rather than long-term thing. And not having a leader.
Because it says surprisingly few leaders, for the nature of leadership demands those who are capable of initiative to drift towards planes with more defined alignments. So it's kind of like, that's the thing. It's sort of, it has got like leaders of battle, but it's just but they are war bands, and that is their only goal is just organizing and fighting and going towards the next the sort of next battle.
It's sort of described as form over function. Oh no,
Yeah.
function over form. Sorry, I got this wrong.
Yeah.
It's described as function over form.
Mm.
But Hamilton, we are missing. We're sort of talking down below. We're not really talking about the main thing that this plane is sort of known for, and I'm talking about the floating cubes of iron
Yes.
that is everywhere. And this is an interesting thing. If you've only read about Acheron in the DM's Guide, 5th edition, it's very short. As with all the sort of outer plane stuff, again, presumably I don't know, maybe they're expanding on that sort of thing in the near future, who knows. But this idea of war and strife, but each of the 4 layers in this place is made up of enormous iron cubes, in quotation marks, that are floating in an airy void which can support life and can support flying. Sometimes these cubes, which can be small or can be like kingdom size across, will collide into each other. And when they collide into each other, you have these echoes of past, like armies colliding, the battle roaring out, and pretty much, an impact. It's like a meteor impacting Earth, just creating like a whole thing and probably decimating anything on it. So interestingly enough, if we go into sort of maybe the defining features of what the land looks like, it's pretty grim. There's no big structures or anything like that is on the surface itself. In the craters, in tunnels and stuff, there will be towns and whatnot, just because at any moment, with a day's notice, you may see another cube coming towards you. And smashing.
100%. I do like how it says there is a light, there is a dim light. The plane's lit by a grey fluctuating light, varies slightly between bright moonlight and dark cloudy day. Never bright enough to harm the eyes of anyone with like dark vision or anything like that. But it does. But I like the idea that some say that a single cube somewhere glows bright enough to light the rest of the plane, and that it's been glowing forever. After all, that's the only way it could light in infinite space, regardless of the explanation the light is there. But there was also the theory that it might have been from the collision of 2 cubes.
Yes,
created this infinite light, which is kind of cool as well.
Like almost like a Big Bang-esque type.
Yeah, like a Big Bang sort of theory, which I can.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yes, and I will say as well, when it talks about cubes, certainly in the Planescape sort of books, as we're sort of looking at them now, cubes is sort of like a general term for the things, like for the different sort of, I guess, meteoroids. That sort of like, I'm sure there's a better meteorological term for it, but that idea that there's different spaces, they can be any shape. So again, as a DM, you don't have to be constant cubes. Although one of the layers does talk about everything being geometrically perfect, which I'm sure we'll go into, which I absolutely I know. But yes, one thing that made me think of this when I was reading through it, this idea of cubes, that if you manage to get to another cube, the gravity sort of again focuses on that cube that you're on. So it goes from, if you're walking up a wall, suddenly the floor becomes a ceiling and all that sort of thing, and it carries on moving. You can't then tell if which one of these is the central point, which one of these cubes is the central point. So instantly I was getting vibes, and less grimdark, I appreciate this, but of Super Mario Galaxy. Because when that first came out, I had to sit down. I wasn't like young at the time when I was playing it, but I was definitely like, early sort of 20s and stuff, and then I sat down and I played it, and I was like, I'm gonna have to turn it off and actually think about how gravity works, because my brain, about how I was getting to places and solving puzzles, couldn't take it. And I can imagine this, if you're describing it to the players, like, probably not saying Super Mario Galaxy, but that sort of like the way the gravity works, it's a bit of a mind meld.
100%. It really is. And there's a couple of places where it talks about later where there's a city that you get to the edge and you just walk over the edge to the next street and you have to make a dex save, or you might just get flung off into the void, which is not fun.
That does sound scary. Yes, I can't remember which layer that's on. Oh no, it's the final. No, yes, I know. Sorry, I'm getting very excited because it is a really interesting one. And I've said this to you before off recording, but I think this is one of my favourite planes we've read so far.
Same here. Yeah.
I think the chaotics are fun because obviously it's like chaotic. But what's interesting when reading this is that there is a lore to it, to each of these planes, and also you might not get that lore, but everyone else does instantaneously. Any person that any inhabitants, it's internal to them, so they will know if you have made a mistake as a player character. They will know that you're not supposed to be here, and you're making a mockery of the rules, and there's no point in arguing it because they know what it is. So it's a kind of different system, because obviously with chaotic you get to a point going, okay,
whatever.
There are going to be consequences, but whatever. Here's our, and just to go back briefly, there was this talk in the primer, this idea that chaotic creatures take longer to get to places on neutral planes compared to lawful planes. Sorry, compared to lawful planes, because chaotic, there's always a distraction. There's always something where it's lawful is like, here is the straight and narrow path.
Yeah.
So I love that, the idea that you have to have a guide or something like that. If you're all sort of vaguely chaotic, or not necessarily, no one's necessarily neutral or even lawful. Like the idea that you like, oh, we're supposed to be there like in a couple of days, and then what are we going to do yet? No, you need someone to be like, no, come on, let's go.
Exactly. No, that's a very good point. I like that. Though it does also have its own little, like, talking about geography earlier and things that to add layers of a little bit of craziness to it, is the time dilation thing. That I think is fun about. So the time flows differently on every cube, and they don't know if it's about the proximity to others or if it's about this time, but time simply stops on the cubes as if they sail through the void without colliding with one another. So if you like the cube on itself, when you're on it, the existence of time on that cube is the same for you as the time is on them. But if you disappear, if a cube moves away from another cube, it could be centuries before it comes back to the other cube, but time will be the same like a day later for the people on the other cube or something like that, because your existence of it it's like kind of got one of these weird time dilation things, which if you want to just make your brain feel like it's hurting, you can read that.
If you're that sort of person who's like, I'm gonna screw with time, you're like, good for you, make sure you make notes.
Exactly.
It feels like these cubes themselves, if we go back to maybe the Spelljammer setting we talked about on our previous show, and this idea that they are, each cube you can make it so it's very, very different in a way, like you said, the time stuff, the weather as well. It talks about in the book this idea that obviously weather is what it is, but usually if it's like very clear and nice, it's like, oh, we're not going to have a collision with another cube. So I love this idea of having like the weather report.
No cubes in the sky tonight.
No cubes. Back to you in the studio. You know. So I did quite like that idea, and this idea that a random cube could disappear forever and then suddenly come back, and that could be a great story point going, oh no,
exactly, there's like an ancient treasure on them or something, like, you know, some ancient artifact or something that could be cool, like, or it comes back and everyone's just skeletons. It's like you saw them one day and then it goes away and it came back, and and you need to find out what's caused all of them to be killed. Or something.
Or something. Killed or something. One of the two. I think I will say, just before we move on, so I did stumble a little bit, because I was like, oh yeah, the time and the weather is different. But the cubes themselves, the actual sort of geography, sort of terrain, is the same. It's sort of this irony type, this irony nothingness. It's an empty wasteland. So again, you sort of described it very well off recording. If you've seen Star Trek and you've seen something called the Borg, it's a little. That's how I imagine it. It's a Borg cube where there are trenches or there are craters and stuff like that. And one thing I did quite like, again, forgive me, I can't remember exactly which layer it is per se, but an idea that I think I would implement across all cubes is that when they collide, any rust or any impact would be at right angles. And that sort of that idea that, you know, damage and stuff like that, so everything would be, again, maybe like a dice, maybe like a Borg cube, that idea of there's a little bit of texture and detail, but it's all at lines and stuff like that. Nothing chaotic. I just
no, I quite like that. Very like it's been sheared like slate or something like that, or like that sort of kind of like graphite. Yes. No, that's cool. I also, though, when you talk about geography, though, you might think, well, how does one eat on a plane made of iron? You can eat, because there is weird food that is made, isn't there, on this plane?
Yes.
Which are cool. Which are called, I'm just reminding myself, they are called
Provender stones?
Provender stones, that's it. I was looking for that. I knew they're stones, but that's it. Provender stones.
Not that we're sponsored by any particular brand, but Provender stones, for me, falls into the category of Huel. These sort of energy...
much like,
protein, energy, like, drink one of these bottles and you'll be great for the whole day. And you're like, it tastes of nothing.
What's that bread in Lord of the Rings?
Lambus bread.
Lambus bread. It's like Lambus bread. Yeah.
But at least Lambus bread looks quite nice, like a little bit of shortbread. These sound dreadful. So so as we sort of mentioned, the cubes themselves, they can be hollow, a little bit like Pandemonium. There's these tunnels which all look very, can be uniform, like as in like squares, which I thought was quite good, and can be big, small, whatever. But that's where you find the most food. So you might find some mushrooms, but more often than not, you have Provender stones, which are I just assume it's like soot. Like you pull it out of the ground and you go
like basalt. It just looks a bit like basalt in my mind. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
what's those stones that people wash themselves with?
Oh, pumice stone.
Pumice stone.
Oh,
yeah, that's kind of what it reminds me of. Yeah, imagine like crunch.
Stone.
Yeah, and I feel it have that texture of that stuff that you put flowers in, the Oasis stuff.
Oh God! Oh no!
Yeah, I know. How awful is that? Oh, it's kind of a horrible feeling.
As we're both going like, ugh, so that's another thing as a DM or GM. If they're like, oh, sitting down to eat, excellent. Just describe the texture of things and how alien and horrible it is to your players. I think, exactly. I think that's the thing. We don't. I'm sure I have talked about this on the DM's book, but I think the use of food in games, like when you're sitting down and stuff, because obviously the most interesting parts really are in those quiet moments. You've done the big battle, you've done the big role playing scene, but the quiet moments, like, what are you doing now? You having something to eat? Excellent. Let me tell you in exquisite, excruciating detail how much this pumice stone tastes terrible.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not a nice respite from your days of warring or getting away from wars. It's not like Isgard, where you're in the beer halls and having all your lovely food and and all that stuff.
No, it is certainly not. It is a far cry from Isgard, so I can say that. But to move on a little bit, so as we sort of mentioned, there are 4 layers to Acheron. There is I'm gonna say this I should have said this at the top of the episode. I demand pronunciation guides.
They are now general. They're in the Netherdeep, aren't they? They're in Netherdeep.
I need it after the word, because I'm not going to be searching for this stuff. I read and then I come straight into this sort of recording. That's what happens here. So Avlas is the first one. That's the one that most people would know, because that's that is the plane of battle, sort of battle of the planes. I don't know why I said that. So yes, that's the topmost layer. Then you have the second one, Thundandin. I think that's how you say it. And that's like it's described as like an enormous sort of planar scrapyard, which is great. Again, I'm thinking very British reference coming in here, but there's scrap heap challenge. So just tons of things just around, and Robert Llewellyn is just there going like, "Hello, hello."
I was just thinking, well, there's a thing in it's some sci-fi cartoon where there's just a scrap heap place where everything just goes to end up, and I feel, but it's just kind of imagined this sort of like
well, that's what it is. This is the dumping ground of the universe, and I'm going to put this fact in here, not a fact, but this little thing in here.
I know what it's going to be.
It's this one where essentially they're like, well, this place generates junk, all this stuff like every single day, and they don't know where it comes from, but they believe there's a rumor that every time you use the disintegrate spell, the stuff that disintegrates ends up.
I love that theory. I'm like, that is such a great. That I was saying, I wanted to say that as well. I think that's so cool.
Again, you just think of any time you've seen like the tip or the site, and you just see the. Again, I would see, because there's talk about Modrons coming to this place to find bits. Modrons on the tractor pushing this stuff into little piles. Beep, beep, beep.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think it's great, and I think it's sort of that idea that you know, energy cannot be created or destroyed. You know, like, so then that sort of theory that in this planar space, why disintegrate? Where would it go? It's not just going to go. It would be energy, and so I love that idea. It just gets transported to this scrap heap. But the thing with that scrap heap, though, is it turns eventually into stone and iron, doesn't it? So like.
Yes.
So I'd like the idea if you found out this, like, someone disintegrated, like you had like a helm of importance for your campaign, but the lich comes out and disintegrates it just when you're about to do the thing, and so then you go like, how can we find this? And you go in and find this theory, and you go then on a planar travel to Acheron to go and find it within a month before it gets turned into stone, and you can go on this like little adventure, like near end game adventure, because it's quite a hard playing. But if you wanted to like extend the campaign a bit, you know, I've just got it, and it gets disintegrated. You'd be like, what?
No. Yeah, absolutely. And going to this plane, there is an effect, a magical effect, where essentially anything that is sort of here has to make saving throws every week. Objects again every week. People every month. It says. But regardless, you start turning to stone, and it's a horrible buffing. So there's just these solid lumps of black iron everywhere. Hence why there are scavengers that come around trying to find things, but it's going to be melded together like a horrible mush, essentially, of solidness. And it does talk about it in this book, about this idea that well, what if, like, a Burke is only half, it's a slow process, so half of them has been converted at the pain of existence. So if you see a friend like, hey, help me, and you're like, oh god, they're pretty much up to their neck and they can't move it, but they're still alive, that sort of thing. But then to get back and like, well, how do we fix this? Because interesting, magical items and artifacts, they'll lose their magical properties as soon as they become this. So you have to like use a dispel magic and stuff like that. But it's interesting here. It talks about creatures who are turned to stone can only be restored by I believe a spell called Crystal Brittle, which is a great name. And then stone to flesh, or by the wish spell. So obviously the wish is like, back to you. But the idea that you have to spend 2 spells if you don't have wish, that's pretty significant, especially if you're on a plane and things are going to try and get you and stuff like that. Like, especially on this particular layer, which is guarded by a rust dragon. Who hates Modrons, and I love that as a character like feature.
How can you hate Modrons?
No, I love Modrons, but I love the idea that somebody hates them. Oh, I see.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I was saying. How can one hate Modrons? But yes, no, it is really. No, I love the idea of Rust Dragon as well. I never had heard of them until I started reading this, and I was like, that sounds like a cool type of dragon. I don't know quite what their special power. I didn't actually read much more into them. Have you read more?
No, not me neither. But it's interesting because it always comes up whenever I go to my local game shop and you go look at the minis and you go, I've got too many minis. There is always a rust monster in there, and I'm like, what is that? and I never find out what it is. So yes, right. I know it's a type of dragon, and clearly this is where they live. This idea that a whole plane is this sort of horrible black iron, which again I assume, like, maybe another reason you might want to go there is that a researcher goes, yes, I would wish to get a sample and so we can test it for magical as all scientists do, but like it's just like this unknowable, horrible metal that is just everywhere, and it's infective as well.
I like it. It's got a mind of its own, which is kind of cool. Can I just, whilst we're here in Thuldanin, we're in this plane, can we talk about how amazing all the Duergar hometowns are? Because every single name of every single one of them is as good as Windglum, isn't it?
So one of the major powers sort of here is the god of the Duergar, and I'm going to say this wrong because I said it wrong in the episode. La Durga, yes. La Durga, yes. That one, who I would highly recommend reading up about Durgar in general. She says, there's an episode in DM's book club which we did with John Dodd about that, and an interesting history as well. So the fact that this god is here, I'm like, because for me there's a lot of history here. But yes, the Durgar themselves as a clan, one of the clans of the dwarves, they're known for very doer, sort of like, again, form over beauty, function over beauty, that sort of thing. So they're very sort of straight-laced and that sort of thing. So very, very cube-esque in their sort of the building stuff. But the names of the towns are brilliant, and I just want to use them all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
So what have we got in terms of town
names? We've got Hammergrim, we've got Cold Dember, Hope Glimmer, Forge Gloom, and Death Knell. Great names for you just got it with those, haven't you? Like
Forge Gloom, I think, is the real name before Gloomhaven.
It is, isn't it? Exactly. And then exactly. And you feel like Hope Glimmer is the only one where they're probably like slightly happier, but it's still gloomy. But it's
maybe they crack a smile as a joke, and that's about it.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I think the whole stuff, like I said, Duergar are really interesting, but those place names, I think, are some of the best town names we've come across so far whilst doing the plane. So I was like, they're great. So 100%.
I'd like to go there.
I don't know if you would.
Well, no, I with my players, I mean. And then can we also talk whilst we're here about the Idiot King?
Yes. Do you want to talk about this whole court? Because I think this is fascinating as a concept.
So, Forge Gloom is a site of the Court of Memory, and it is a haunting spirits keep most petitioners away. Those few chiefs and advisors who have no choice but to reside here live brief lives. The damp and chill of Forge Gloom pervades everything, leading to many deaths from exposure. It's like, it kind of explains it's not a nice place. But the Court of Memory, basically the Idiot King, who is the leader chieftain of this realm, he doesn't rule truly alone. He is advised, haunted and possessed by the spirits of his ancestors and predecessors. When he is possessed by these spirits, he gains their abilities and skills. So he may one day be a priest, a master strategist the next day, an illusionist the following, but he pays a price because these hauntings slowly destroy his own core of strength and will until eventually he can only rule when possessed, thus becoming the idiot king.
How cool is that as a concept, as a story, as an adventure hook?
And he ascends this tower, doesn't he, to get to the spiral staircase to commune with the gods. And by the time he comes down, he's just a lump, and it describes him as he's a limp ragdoll, good for nothing but eating, sleeping, and breathing.
Oof.
That's
It's
just
cruel.
it's cruel
Isn't
existence. Like it just
yeah.
pervades this sort of sense. I think the sense of Acheron, that sort of like endless strife but this is like, instead of this being this is like a internal struggle battle of worn down and until you are nothing, basically, is kind of what Acheron does to you. You're a shell.
Yeah, this idea of being possessed by different minds and stuff like that you literally can't plan from one day to the next.
Yeah.
It is cruel. Like I actually felt very emotionally affected by that, because it's such a I haven't seen anything like that since, and again it brought back memories of, and I know this is going to be completely random, but Full Metal Alchemist, and there's a scene in it where there's like he's creating these animals or something, and spoiler, there's a small child and a dog, and they get put together, and it is the most saddest thing in the world, because obviously it's just cruel and horrible, and it's and it's just that episode that was a bit where it made me go, this series is amazing to watch, so I highly recommend.
Full Metal Alchemist is amazing and is emotionally heart-wrenching the whole way through. I've watched the old one, not the Brotherhood one. That's the one
I'd recommend both series. They're very different, but anyway, so I'm just like getting very emotionally affected by that. But yes, anything with Durgar, I think, is an interesting story. Again, I would highly recommend people read up on Durgar and dwarves in general. This idea of clans and like the importance of the Forge and the gods, because they are certainly they're very important to most dwarven clans, but to Durgar because they were so spurned by the gods. So going back on it is really.
There's a lot. Isn't one of the gods Thuladin is a god, and this is called Thuldanin. So there's definitely a relationship there. I was thinking, but I couldn't quite figure it out. That was all.
Yeah.
So I needed to. I don't know enough on the Duergar and the Dwarven lore. I need to listen to that DM Book Club episode probably, and I will.
You do. Moving on then to the third layer. Now you did pronounce this. There you go. I was like Tintibulus, which is a great name, and I love this. So this is a plane of perfect geometry and lore. So absolute that nothing can survive. You're like, whoa, what is this tagline of Blue Planet we've got going on here? So it's filled with these blocks, these cubes of many regular shapes. And they've got, it could be very like dice, if you think about it. You can have 20-sided, you can have a 10-sided or 12-sided, it has to be that sort of thing. I like that. And they are solid throughout. That is a key difference between all the other planes. Obviously, they could be riddled and stuff. These are solid throughout. So when the collisions occur, again, this is where the fractures across natural fault lines come in. But this idea that there's no way to hide. You see this coming, you better sprint to the other side of the plane or the cube, because it's going to crush you. There's no way to hide in tunnels or things, because they are just pure solids, which is terrifying. And
I think the other thing it made me think of before we move on from it is Kepler solids. Have you ever heard of these?
No. Do you want to describe what that is?
So Kepler, who famous astrologist, not as in cosmologist, not like astrologist, like cosmologist. Sorry, not an astrologist.
I knew what you meant.
Yeah, sorry. As in who people will know about, was convinced of a regular universe of like regular solids, couldn't and got quite far down and deep into understanding all the regular shapes, because he felt that there must be a shape that defines what we're all working on. And so if you look at them, he worked on, they're called the 4 Kepler Poinsot solids, are the famous ones, and they are the small stellated dodecahedron, the great stellated dodecahedron, the great dodecahedron, and the great icosahedron. And basically they are infinite, like they are regular solid shapes that are just mind-bending. There is the Great Dodecahedron is a star on a pentagonal cuboid that creates this very weird eye effect when you look at it, but they are amazing, and I can imagine some of those, like showing some of these really esoteric ones would be quite fun. They're worth looking at. There's an interesting story about it because it really it pushed Cosmology back probably about 20 years because he didn't do what he probably should be doing. Well, no, as in he went down the wrong channel. And it meant that, I don't think it was 20 years, but it was quite a big chunk of a great mind that sort of went down the wrong path. But it's interesting. So interesting.
But again, I love the idea that you would describe seeing cubes like that, and then people are like, I don't get it, and then you show them and stuff and go, I still don't get it.
Yeah, even looking at it now, I'm looking at it and you're like, wait, that's how's that? I don't understand how it works. It breaks my brain.
It's breaks your actual brain.
Yeah.
The one defining feature of it, which I will admit I didn't look too deeply into, but this idea of a hopping tower and a hopping mage.
Oh yes, the hopping tower was cool. Yeah, I like that. It's a master of wild magic, powerful priest who serves a nameless, faceless power of travelers, which, in my mind, is Acheron, which we'll come onto at some point, I'm sure, because he's the sort of secret, hidden old god, dead god that got killed by Lady of Pain. But anyway, so the hopping tower is it's very interesting. I only thought it's clearly a really bad place to go. High level encounter if you want a fun sort of challenge of you've got to get through the sea of stones. Incredible. Again, a beautiful image. I can just see it, just all these standing stones and then a tower. It's very cool. Exactly.
Very cool
and they're also called the singing stones, so because they chime when they hit each other, so you can just imagine this sort of little board game you could play around it. I think it'd be quite fun. And
that'll be fun to get to get to this tower and stuff like that. It will take some skill. So the idea that you could actually get a whole big map and make your way out as well, because there is talk, again going back slightly to the second plane, that there are bits of spell jammers in this place, so that's why people might want to go there and try and find these treasures and stuff. So the idea that you could have a spell jammer disappear. Interesting.
No, it's very cool. And then the final layer, then, isn't it?
The final layer, the Arcanus.
Arcanthus.
Arcanthus. Yes. Yeah. A word keeps jumping out every time I read about this plane, and it's razor blades.
Yes.
It's basically compared to the full solids of these cubes from the third layer. This fourth layer is just razor blades. So these things have crushed and smashed and collided so much that they are literal slithers of the sharpest bits of iron, which are just whistling through the darkness, the void. So instantly you can get peppered by them. You just be split up and splurged. Again, I'm thinking Hellraiser style, just just complete ripped apart.
Yeah.
Or you're constantly dodging, and it's just that's it. There's no sort of blocks per se. There's just all these races. There's a rumor though, which I quite like. So again, it has talked about, we've talked about it before briefly, this idea of paths and stuff like that. So the river Styx sort of makes its way down through this particular plane. There's a rumour that the source or the final destination of the river Styx is at the bottom of this plane. And it contains every memory it's ever stolen from the people that have fallen in the river. And I just was like, ooh.
Yeah. Another great adventure hook.
Yeah, you have to, again, I know it's a different character, but in the Hercules film where it goes down to go pick up Meg and go back up to just going down and trying to pick up a memory or try and find something just down there, just be grabbed at by whatever is down there, and then also fighting razor blades. It's all those sort of cool things.
It's kind of cool, isn't it? You could just and even if it was the end of a good 20-30 episode session arc of getting to Acheron, someone's lost their memory, you gotta get to Acheron, you get through all these layers, you finally get through the hopping tower or something to find some sort of artifact, you've done all this stuff, you've seen the idiot king and dealt with something there, and then now you're just floating in this void of darkness and ice blades, and you're just trying to get through, and it's I could imagine it being quite an epic moment.
Quite epic. And so another notable feature of this layer is Zorono. Is that how you pronounce it again? Have I said that wrong?
Zorono.
Zorono.
Yes,
Zorono.
That's it.
Again,
the City of Shadows.
The City of Shadows, a great thing. So it's the idea that this sort of township is surrounded by what it calls a blood forest, which instantly I'm like, what does that mean? But ultimately, it's this idea that there's like a protection of like a sphere of anything of wood. It just keeps out. I feel like a natural barrier rather than a force field of all these little bits of razors, peppering. So you can imagine almost like a porcupine or a hedgehog.
There's a good little picture of it on the second page. It's just like, just kind of shards.
So good. The shards and stuff still come in, and so I like that idea that every so often, it's this idea like the building sort of sway whenever it's struck by a particularly large piece of ice. So it's constantly you're in shift and motion, but also any sort of you're like, pew, you're like, whoa, you've got to be careful because these things still do get through the gaps. Yeah,
and they call them dark birds, don't they? The sort of like the shards that come in and will hit you. Like they could just randomly hit you when you're walking down the street. And but the people that live there are an interesting folk, and one that hasn't come back into D&D 5e, and it's something that it hopefully will do, and maybe in the multiverse, I don't know, but which is bladelings, which is what some say, and probably definitely is based on what they look like. The Lady of Pain is a bladeling. So they have these blades that come out of their face, and their skin are just covered in blades, and so there's definitely a relationship to this sort of shard-like land. And they're not a nice people in this world, but they are but an interesting set of people nonetheless, and definitely their relationship to the Lady of Pain is kind of interesting in itself as well. So they're kind of a interesting,
cool little thing. Yeah, because there is talk about these armies as well, which should really sort of move on to the populations and stuff like that in a second. The one thing though we have missed, and I just want to, so we're going from the bottom layer back to the top briefly.
Yeah, go back.
I want to back up. I wanted to quickly talk about the blue cube. This again, a cube that sort of is in this layer. It has a dragon on it. A dragon who is a blue dragon, Tesla, who suffers total amnesia because they've been put there because of their greed. One of the deities has sort of gone, you're too greedy, going, and so they are on there and they forget why they're on there every day, and their wings are in tatters and stuff, so they can't escape. So what they do, they scratch out everything they know so that when they wake up they can read it and remember who put them there, who's visited, all that sort of thing. So I compared it to 51st Dates. You what was the film you compared it to?
I think it's called While I Was Sleeping. What's that? I don't know. It's the one with Nicole Kidman. I never actually went and googled what it was, but it was Nicole
Kidman, Colin Firth, and Mark Strong. We won't spoil it because it is a cracking film, I'd say. But I can spoil 51st Dates, where essentially a person meets somebody else and realizes they have total amnesia.
Before I go to sleep,
that is a cracking film. But and essentially he goes on several dates because he loves her and makes an effort for her, and it's very, very sweet. It also has a very young Sam Ganji, I can't remember, Sean Austin in it as the brother. It's really random. Anyway, so this idea of an amnesia and this sort of character trying to remember stuff but also can't get away. Fantastic, very interesting story hook, I think, because obviously you'd be like, well, we want to help this person because they don't want to be here and they're suffering amnesia, but why are they here? Why is it a very powerful deity put them here, and having that sort of it's just interesting, this idea of greed and stuff, and so sort of left on this cube, which I thought was really interesting.
No, it is really cool. I really like that as well. I picked it as one of the things I wanted to mention as well, and I think that idea of just coming to this cube, because you can imagine it says that the dragon resides in like tunneling a lot to stay away from things. So you'd land on this pretty desolate thing, and it's just scratched with all these like insignias and notes and stuff like that, and you maybe start reading it, trying to understand what's going on, and then you hear this and it's like dragon fight.
I love that idea though, that you don't meet the dragon first, you read their stuff, you see the claw marks about how many days they've done it, and it's like almost infinite when you're looking at it, and then beautiful. I love that. And maybe you don't even recognize it at first. That sort of thing where you're like, there's lots of big gaps, there's like lots of big sort of dents in the thing, and you realize, it's like when you're like, it's a dinosaur footprint, but actually it is a huge scratch going, I will have my revenge.
Yes, exactly.
So yes, well, let's move on to population of Acheron, because we sort of talked about it in general, going down a bit. So yes, this idea, going back to this conflict and clashing and this and that. So there are sort of two big pantheons in general, sort of two big sort of sources, as it were, of power here. So we have sort of the goblinoids and sort of the hobgoblins and goblins versus the orcs, and those are sort of the two sort of main things. So you have I will be honest, Grimish, I know that is the chief power of the orcs. I have absolutely no idea how to say the goblin of the chieftain of the goblins. Do you have any chance?
Do you want me to have a go at it? I'm going to read them now. There's Maglubiet.
I think that's what it is.
Kurgorbeeg and Nomoggeia.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you for giving me this, because I was just like this.
They are hard.
They are hard, and I know it's one of those things. If you just learn it, it's fine. But this idea that they are these two pantheons, these two groups, as it were, are always in constant bash. They are locked in an eternal war between them. And again, you can have there's obviously various famous sort of NPCs you can have. There's someone called Matt Creek Iron Skull of the Free Fang tribe. That's an orc character. Their sort of defining feature. They have a head wound that never heals.
Yes,
it's always a little bit pussy.
Yeah,
and
I like that.
They're very good natured about it. But I'm just like,
yeah, that was a kind of quite a cool little just thing to give them. Really, I thought that was.
I thought that was good. And then they do have a rival. On the other hand, they have Rostorhan the Foul. What I quite liked, again, it's very brief, that sort of story about it. Obviously, again, I will admit, for me, I'm not a big fan of war movies or war like this in general. So for me, it sort of went over my head a bit. But I like the idea that here you have two rivals. Whenever they've only met twice in battle, and each time it's been a stalemate, and they hate each other. And I just thought that's such an interesting relationship that you could always bring back, even if it's in the background. You see these two always meeting up and always never gets one over on the other one. I just was like, oh, that's an interesting thing. So yeah, but also having like they're not called prefixes, whatever it is after them, like the Foul. I quite like that. I'm like, why are they called the Foul?
Yeah. No, they are. There are some great names of like the Three Fangs, the Rotting Iron, the sort of like of the clans and the towns of them are kind of cool. They're kind of like, it's all very kind of like grim again, isn't it?
Yes.
That's the sort of feeling. I also there's some the orcs have. Like talking about war and that sort of like never-ending strife of it. They don't actually have they have towns, but the most people live in trench towns. So they're dug out trenches into this infinite plane, just like, and they're living basically in that, and it's that horrific, you get those horrible scenes and feelings of those like horrible trenches and trench foot and sort of just like that sort of that sort of strife,
trench warfare, absolutely.
That's what I mean, which is just like never ending, like no one moving in any direction, because the only way is to get out and over the trench, and that's no one's going to get out.
And that's definitely
exactly.
It?
So it's kind of, it just really builds on that sort of imagery and trying to get that feeling towards you of like how grim this layer is, which I don't know, it's just interesting sort of things.
Like we just sort of, it's interesting because we talked about obviously the second, third, and fourth layers. There's rarely any fights on that. Obviously that's always on the first plane, but you think, we'll come and do some magical research. We need to get to the bottom layer to find the River Styx. Whereas the top layer is this grimness. So the idea that you have to get to this first layer first and then make your way down, God, it's pretty hard going, I think. And I think, again, maybe you need to have that chat with your players going, hey, the conflict that's in the background, it's now pretty much everywhere around you. So, and again,
it's a very particular place to take people. Like,
it is, but like again, that's the thing we were sort of said at the top of the episode. This idea of like, it's a lawful evil. Evil is the after bit, lawful. So they are all going on. So if you don't agree with what's happening, tough. Because it is what it is, and so I think that's going to be an interesting one for players, because obviously we're like, well, we can fight and make one person win, but the idea is that no one really doesn't have any winners, which I was like interesting on that. But just going on briefly, sort of like we've got the obviously a majority of petitioners here. We've got orcs, goblins, hobgoblins, but also I just wanted to quick mention. this idea of there's these big armies of various pantheons, but also there are rogue armies that just happen to be around. This idea that you have a massive undead or automaton that's serving either like you were sort of mentioning before, this idea of a powerful priest or mage, or just a ragtag team of scavengers that survives only as long as it can take supplies up from the others, all by force. And it mentions a couple of them. There's like a necromancer king. There are slightly mummified fish people I saw. A lost clan of bladelings. But again, I like this idea that they're only lost if they just go over one edge of the cube and then they come back and they're like, haha, surprise. But this idea that these armies, they serve their own agenda. They may be aimless, but they're always hungry for battle. So even if you spot one, you're like, maybe they'll be friendly. They're not going to be friendly. They're like, enemies, attack.
Yeah. And they will slowly but surely die out, don't they? That's what they always say. Like they finally just like run out of steam, the rogue armies. So they never last so long. And there's like one of those classic like, but there is one lost away on a cube somewhere, and will they come back and it'll be the greatest army or something like that. So, there's always fun stories like that.
Agreed.
Which is the rogue army of the necromancer king, who is a lich. That was it. Who's going to?
That was it. Yeah. Boretti, I think I got that down as Boretti. Great. Moving on quickly to magical conditions. So interesting compared to the Chaos Planes, which has quite a lot about the magic and the imbalance of it, like almost like it's been turned up to 11. Here, not so much. It's either all or nothing in terms of magic, but every magical action has a magical reaction as a balance. And I think you sort of mentioned it again off recording, this idea of like, if you step onto the plane, somebody has died. There is a one in one out system, and there is always a reaction to it.
As I said, it's like a club.
It's like a club. Yes, it's a horrible club. We don't want to go into this club. But I think that's quite interesting, and that idea that again, maybe if you're looking at players' spell lists and stuff like that, just having an idea, like, and certainly sort of looking at maybe wild magic, even though the effects are sharply reduced on the plane. I think just having a little plan. It's obviously, it's not like Pandemonium where it's like, magic draws people in because they're like, there's a magical light to play out. Just the idea, like, if you create a light somewhere, there's a light that goes out somewhere else.
Exactly.
Again, very much Full Metal Alchemist as well, that idea of transference, moving it elsewhere.
I do like that. The interesting thing about summoned creatures will always obey any command. They're not like used to I don't know if you still do in 5e. I forget. I haven't actually had to summon a creature in a long time. But do you have to still roll to keep the creature under your control?
Oh, depends. If it's like a summoned fiend type one, then yes. But summoned fae is fine.
No, because that's the thing. So like on this, you wouldn't fiends in this. You don't have to. They automatically fail the save. There's no save. They don't have to make a save. They are under control. So there's that sort of, and it kind of just it again imbues that idea of what the world is about, is that there is law and order and obeying the letter of any command. So it will, like, you could play on some of those things. Like if you say definitive things, it will maybe just go down the obvious path. Those sort of classics.
We've definitely mentioned this idea of naming creatures being very important, but the one thing about the summoning ones, which I think you probably were just about to go on to, this idea of a magical hostage. This idea, if you bring someone to you, somebody else is exchanged for their place. Because of that reverse thing. And that is, I will say this, that is pretty terrifying. Because obviously if something happens to this creature on this plane, because you've done something, something's going to happen to you.
And the DM has got to roll a save for the hostage when you go in, and if they save the save, you are the magical hostage. So you order your fiend in, you end up in battle if that's the save you have to make. Exactly.
It's just so that I quite like that. That's the one out of all the sort of magical schools. I was like, that's a cool one, and one that again as a DM might have to plan a bit, because it's something that the players were like, oh yeah, we'll totally do this, and you're like, okay, cool. Just a note. Okay, cool. You're in the battle instead. What? I like that. Just quickly look at the others. Divination. It's interesting, this one.
Yeah.
I think it talks about, like, you can't use it to spy on opposing forces. It's like some sort of gentleman's agreement, which I thought was quite funny. This idea of omens and spotting and scrying and getting omens or visions and stuff like that, but there's this sort of unwritten rule that they don't apply to the person, they apply to your whole group. So there's this idea that, you know, generals who do this sort of thing, do the scrying and stuff like that, if they keep getting bad omens, then they don't stick around for long. Because obviously people in charge don't want to have bad omens constantly.
No, exactly. I think it's fun, but I like that idea that you can't see on the opposing forces, and it kind of makes me feel like the plane itself it kind of proves the plane wants the battle to commence, you know, and to be continuous. Doesn't want anyone to have an advantage over another. It kind of imbues that idea. That's kind
I like that.
Yeah.
It feels like a big game of Battleship where you can't see where the other forces are.
Well, it just exactly. It wants them to be constantly locked in battle. It doesn't want it otherwise. That was all.
I like that. Yeah, necromancy is a good place for undead armies, but it depends on the life force of the caster. So if you're doing something against a creature and you have significantly less life force than that creature, it backfires onto you, which I thought was interesting. That sounds like, not again. You have to plan it a little bit if you were a player, but again, you might not know until you go up against
and you try
a rust dragon. He's like, whoops.
Whoops.
Whoopsie. The final one that I just want to is elemental. So with the right keys, you can get like, you know, fire and water. Interesting with fire and elementals, because obviously the ground is metal. It will have quite a big effect. Like, it'll heat up quite a bit. So I quite like the environment aspect of that. But of course, Earth elementals have no effect on the iron cubes, which I'm very sad. I like this idea of the version of the Thing comes out. It's like, oh no, and it's like, let me in.
No, I've seen that gif. Let me in. Sorry.
Let me in. Yeah, exactly like that. Yeah. So, yes.
That's what's next on our list of things that we look at then?
What is next on our things? Oh, let's talk briefly about politics. I would say a lot of this plane, it is focused on the environment and stuff like that, but I think the politics of it are quite interesting. So, cause, we sort of mentioned it's a home of battalions, armies, and constantly at war, but they are encouraged, like you sort of said, by the plane and by the powers that thrive on it. Sort of this strive and destruction. Now there is, we sort of mentioned a few of these sort of deities, again, the Orcish and the Goblinoid sort of pantheons, the god of the Durgar as well. Again, as we sort of said, there's a history of sort of trauma and battle and war. I will say that there is one deity, one power that's not devoted to war, and I know I'll say this name wrong again, even though we've been over it just before the episode as well.
Leikung, I think it is.
Leikung. And I've got this down here as like a sanctuary for traitors, deserters, and cowards, which I thought is pretty
it good. Is part of the celestial bureaucracy, which is ponderous, efficient, and unstoppable. And cool. This is part, and this is part of the same sort of pantheon as Yen Wing Yang, which, if we do an Outlands, he is located on the Outlands, which we do a piece on that as well, outside of the plains, which has got lots of interesting, cool places on there. As I said, Yen Wing Yang's palace is the halls of, I forget the name of it, but it's basically Brazil, the movie. It's bureaucracy or let loose, and it is basically these considered like amazing judgment halls of judgment. I think that's what it's called, the infinite halls of judgment or something. And so whilst Yen Wing Yang is interested in the application of what the crime is and the rules and the law and the order of it, Lei Kung is the world for decreeing the judgment that goes with it, the punishment for that crime and those rules. And so, as I said, the petitioners are bounty hunters, mercenaries, executioners, and others who serve the cause of retribution. And cool. Hand in hand with the mercy killers, who are the faction that reside here. So they are Sigil's variation on that theme. So in Sigil you have the governors, who are the lawmakers. You have and then you have the Harmonium, which are the guards and the police force and the sort of they get you, and then the mercy killers, which are the judgment definers, which are mercy killers, as in like they just go around killing people for being naughty, basically, and that's it. And they're not very nice. They're not a nice
naughty,
bunch.
naughty.
Yeah, you're naughty. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Cake or death.
Cake or death.
So, yes, it's that's leaking, and the Duke of Thunder rules absolutely and without question. His decrees are instantly turned into actions by his servitors and proxies. The realm revolves around his slightest whim, and his tower is called the Resounding Tower because whenever, or sometimes the Explosive Tower, because of when he gets in a rage, it will just explode with thunder. Yeah, which is kind of cool.
Again, just the visual of that. If you just happen to be walking by for some whatever reason, and suddenly like you feel it in your bones, just sort of like, and then you maybe see a flash of lightning, and you're like, what was that? And then just like, and you just feel it in your bones. You get the lightning and thunder coming out of the way. So yes, the final thing I did want to say on sort of the politics, but more or less the population. Sorry. Again, I know we're going to come to Modrons later. I know we've got Mechanis coming up. I know. But there was this image I had. So we sort of mentioned it briefly earlier, this idea that Modrons, they are scavenging in the scrapyard and all that sort of thing. But there's a rumour I saw, which they're gathering stuff for new cogs for Mechanis by carving out the blocks themselves. So essentially mining. But then I had this image of Hugh turned up at the battlefield. But you can see one of the big cubes in the sky has like a quarry on it. That we've seen that in the countryside when suddenly there's a big bit of the hill taken out, and I was just like, yes, I want to see that with Modrons all over it, like just like
perfectly square little inverted ziggurat sort of thing going down.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and so I just like that idea that they won't stop until the whole of this plane has
now. Does the Modron start in the middle of a cube? Of the square, or does it start at the edge of a square? That is the question.
No, it must be an edge, right? They want to use up the most possible.
So they'd start at the edge and work their way in instead of starting in the middle and work their way out.
Yeah, I would assume so. Otherwise, it's madness.
Is that madness? Oh,
madness!
I love it. That's good.
Yeah,
I
love that idea that you interrupt a Modron mining initiative. You sort of land and it's like, sorry, can you get out of the way? We're in the middle of processing this cube.
Exactly. Oh, amazing. I love Modrons. Oh, I'm so excited for Mechanis. It's going to be so much fun.
I know. But the final thing I know I do is one more thing I know. So just again,
the Columbo syndrome.
The Columbo syndrome, Fiona syndrome, we'll call it. From the DM's guide as well. I know, like I said, the whole point of this show is that you go through the Planescape stuff, but I will say from the DM's guide there is the optional rule called Bloodlust. And Acheron rewards a creature for harming other creatures and by imbuing that creature with the strength to keep fighting. So whilst on this plane, the creature gains temporary hit points equal to half its hit point maximum whenever it's reduced to a hostile creature to 0 hit points. So you keep fighting, you're going to get more and more temporary hit points because you want you to keep going. Yeah. So I quite like that.
Again, fits that sort of thing. Idea of the battle. Yeah,
exactly. So there you go. So yeah, that is Acheron. I you know what? There's a lot in it. It was a bit sniffy when we were coming to the Plains of Lore. And I was like, no. Apart from Mechanos, which I know I was going to absolutely love. I was like, oh, which one is Acheron? And actually, it's bonkers with the cubes, like getting your head around that. But then this idea of strife and war and like making that a permanent thing, like as a feature. But then also having other layers which don't have that aspect of it. I think it's an interesting little world to go visit. And I definitely would be interested to take players to and see what 100%. They make of it.
I think coming off the back of Isgard, which is a very similar, it's quite well positioned in the way that they've organised them, as much as we can say we did that.
As we did.
No, but that sort of counterpoint that this one is all about war, but it's such a more interesting story than the Isgard one, which is so
100%.
I just found that. Well, you know how much my theories.
Well, we talked about this. I completely agree. It's that sort of like, because it feels very self-serving, privileged. Like, yes, the good fight.
Exactly. And actually, the glorification of war, as you've mentioned, exactly. Whilst this is like the very much the not glorification of war, and the sort of like the trouble. It kind of takes on all the qualities that is sort of awful about war, and sort of very much highlights them, which I think is very interesting for. I just think that's what's kind of great about Planescape, is it does play on, it takes some very extreme sort of like concepts and sort of really puts them on show, which I think is quite interesting, and I think that's what this one does very well. And Isgard does the same. It does show that in a very interesting way. It's just it's not my cup of tea, but I guess that's the thing.
No. But if you think about, because obviously Isgard is Ysgard and Arborea are very similar in that sort of big. Like blustering, bolshy, very strong in their feelings, and it's interesting because those are the only two sort of good planes in the chaos one. Because otherwise, then you've got the abyss, pandemonium, limbo. It's interesting then to come to Acheron, which has similar ideals to Ysgard, and I think to Arborea in a way, because it's like you still like are passionate to be like, I hate this person, I'm gonna kill them, I'm gonna But it's
an evil. It's the passion of hatred and anger, not sort of hope and fight and glory. Which I mean, if those are good or not, but you know what I mean. It's that sort of those traditional feelings.
There's a line in it that says that they are basically in conflict and it's pointless, and they know it. And that was the key thing. They know it. The people that are in it, they are the cogs, they are the people, the privates on the front, and they know this is hopeless, and yet this is all they know to do it.
And the thing is, as well, Isgard though is also pointless because everyone.
But they don't know.
but they don't quite clock onto it, which is kind of interesting. It's just really it's a really interesting balance of the two. I find. I'm loving going through these this way because it's allowing us to think of them in that it's seeing the contrast between the two and being able to dissect them, and because I think Arcadia is going to be interesting as a comparison to Arborea because they're very similar. But I think what in my limited Planescape that I read a lot of it, but I've never gone this deep into them. And I think I've got in my mind, well, Arborea and Arborea is the bolshy version of Arcadia, but I think there's going to be more to it than just that when we talk about that as well.
But that's the thing, isn't it? I think I mean, we could say we planned it like this because we did, but also I think it's much better to do it like, rather than just going around the great cosmology wheel, it is much better to be like, okay, chaotic planes, okay, lawful planes, okay, the other planes,
neutral planes,
the other ones, the other fun ones as well. Well, Hamilton, what is the plane we're going to talk about next time?
We mentioned it just then. We are going to be moving into the greater good of Arcadia, as it's named. I'm going to read the subheading because I quite liked it, which is birds in the forest, flowers in the meadows, and everything in its place. Why argue with perfection?
It's that final line that gives me chills.
It does, doesn't it? Because it's like there's something not quite right with that, is there?
No, not at all. There's that chill because it's like everything is perfect. It's very weirdly, the thing that comes to my mind is it's like Stepford Wives. Everything, we've made it perfect for this world we're in. Why would we change it?
It's too good to be good, isn't it? It's too good to be good. And I think I'm looking forward to that actually, because I think there's a lot, and also the fact that the Harmonium, as I mentioned earlier, make their space there and don't allow people through the first layer already twigs my DM's mind.
Nope.
Do you know what I mean?
Nope.
It doesn't. There's something wrong there. There's something wrong.
Yes, it is. Well, we'll see you guys there next time. But until then, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, catch up on previous episodes and VODs of this show and our sibling show, the DM's Book Club. We'll put some links around so that people can do it. And until next time, we will see you on the next plane.
Yeah. Well, oh my gosh, bye! Bye! That was a very creepy bye!